ring announcer Thomas Triber. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the time has arrived for Inside Boxing Weekly. So here are your hosts, Mike Goodpaster, John Einreinhofer, and Jeremiah Preisser on the Grueling Truth Sports Network.
Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Weekly on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Inside Boxing Weekly is brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation. Go check out Alex Ramos and Jackie Richardson on Facebook at the Retired Boxers Foundation. Do great things for, of course, retired boxers. I'm your host for Inside Boxing Weekly, Mike Goodpaster, and right now I want to welcome in my esteemed co-hosts. First up, Jeremiah Preisser.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? I'm excited to be on.
Don't say it like that. It sounded a little limp-wristed. Go ahead.
Did it? Let's get it going. Let's get this going, guys.
Okay. That sounded a little like Quincy Jones or something. What was it? James Earl Jones or James or whatever. Next up, we, of course, have the legal counsel for the Grueling Truth. And we put him to use a lot to keep Jeremiah out of jail. John Einreinhofer. How you doing, John?
Good to be here, Mike. Glad to do anything I can to keep things rolling.
All righty. And we're going to start rolling with David Price against Sergey Kuzmin. David Price, once again, looked like a good fighter for a couple rounds, and then he got tired. I was not real impressed with Kuzmin, but he's fighting David Price, so if you make it through the third round, you're going to win. What was your take on the stoppage, John?
Price, I didn't really expect anything from Price. He's never beaten anyone. He's got some power, so not a surprise. Kuzmin hasn't impressed me yet, but I haven't seen enough negatives to be completely down on him either. He just looks a little plodding to me, but looks like a relatively strong guy. I think in general the heavyweight depth, and we can talk about this a little more as we go on, but I think really the heavyweight depth is probably on an upswing, and guys like Kuzmin are guys on the bottom half of it, or contenders for the bottom half of it, where we're going to see what they can bring to the table, and we're not sure yet. But there's enough of those types of guys that I think it's getting more interesting. I do think the division's on an upswing. I don't know which way it's going to come out for him. I can't tell enough from David Price. I couldn't tell enough when he was in with Mansour before that had the technical stoppage. He looks a little plodding to me, but looks like a strong guy, and for me, he's just still an incomplete.
Yeah, and I'm just glad they stopped the fight when they did, because we all know how that was going to end in the next round, Jeremiah.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a good thing as well. I mean, Price, I know we talked about this off air, but I do think that Price, he showed glimpses of why people, spoke highly of him initially. I mean, even Dan Raphael had him the ESPN heavyweight prospect of the year. Maybe it was prospect in general of the year in 2011. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that was back in, 2011 or something? I can't quite remember. But I mean, yeah. But when you look at his skill set, I mean, the guy is pretty quick for a big man, a real big guy. I mean, his punches are pretty straight. His sense of distance is pretty good. I mean, he has some variety in his punches, but again, it's just that stamina and it's that chin. And, we also talked about it, this off air, about how you see a lot of tools in guys, but, boxing is, arguably the toughest sport on earth. So, if you can't cut it in something like stamina or chin, you're not likely to make it to the very top. And Kuzmin is obviously a guy that I've been following for a while. I wrote an article on him a while back, on my my prospect spotlight. Just my assessment, and of course it's brief because he hasn't gotten in a lot of rounds recently, as John alluded to. But I think his punches are starting to be a little bit sharper. He's not a one punch kind of guy, but his work rate is pretty good. He looks like he's slimmed down pretty well. His defensively, he looks pretty solid too. I mean, I was surprised because Price was able to catch him a number of times, but his chin seemed to hold up pretty well. And I think defensively, he was solid enough to evade most of those shots while he wasn't making these big, flamboyant, defensive gestures. He was just, moving his head left and right and, getting the job done. So I thought it was a pretty good performance by him. But again, until he steps up to somebody we know can give him some rounds, it's hard to tell exactly where he's going to end up.
All right. right, and that will officially be, I think, the last time we ever talk about David Price on this show. Next up, Luke Campbell.
It should be, at least. Let's say that. It should be.
Yeah, I think it will. I don't think you can really sell him anymore unless you're going to put him in again, 4-rounder against a midget that can't reach his chin. Luke Campbell, unanimous decision victory over Mendy. 116, 112, 118, 111, 119, 109. I think this was an impressive performance, Jeremiah. I still don't know if he's going to be able to hang with the main guys at that weight division and lightweight. I mean, whether it's, I think, Linares or your boy Lomachenko. I think he's way far away from that. But this was a solid performance.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think, because Luke Campbell is also a guy that I wrote on a while back, and he was an Olympic gold medalist, and he's a tall southpaw. So initially, when he came into the pro ranks, I thought there was something to like there. I mean, a guy who is technically solid, coming out of the amateur ranks and being tall and showing, when he first started, he looked like he was going to be a pretty good puncher. Over time, he looks like he's got a solid punch, but nothing devastating, of course. But I do think this was his sharpest performance to date. Obviously this was a rematch, so he was trying to get some revenge on Mendy. And in the first fight, anybody who saw it, Mendy overwhelmed him. He worked really hard. He was a tough guy. His defense is pretty tight. But Campbell, under the tutelage of who's at the McCracken now or whoever he's under, but his stamina was really good. His movement was fluid. In fact, this is the most fluid that I've ever seen him. His punches look like they're getting just a bit tighter. His hooks aren't quite as sloppy. His movement is, his concentration was the best I'd ever seen it. He was only tagged a few times here and there. So I was glad, that he put on the performance that he did. And, even though he didn't get a stoppage or a knockdown, I mean, this is just one of those mental hurdles that he overcame. So I didn't really put too much weight into a stoppage itself. But for a guy who was pressing him like Mendy, he did a really good job of banging the body consistently. And, that's what I liked most. I mean, if you're going to slow down a guy who's coming at you, just go to the breadbasket. As Teddy Atlas would say, put some water in the basement. But this is a good performance. I mean, he had a really good performance against Jorge Linares as well. So I think that he will be competitive against the likes of, maybe Richard Comey or maybe Robert Easter Jr. But, he's not going to hang with the best. I mean, Mikey Garcia, Lomachenko, even a guy like Gervonta Davis, I think just too much for him at this point.
All right. John, what do you think the ceiling is for Campbell here? Do you agree with Jeremiah?
I think Jeremiah did an excellent job of summing up his ceiling because, I don't think he could hang with Gervonta Davis. He fought Linares well, and I don't think he could hang with Lomachenko. But I think what this fight did for me, and some of the recent events that, by Campbell's own doing as well, have worked to his favor, is he's really solidified himself as a true lightweight contender below those top guys. And I think that was a little bit in question because before he fought Linares, he'd had the loss to Mendy. Linares was being highly regarded, but you still weren't completely sure. And then Campbell got dropped early but performed well against Linares. That was a good thing for Campbell, but you were still wondering exactly what it meant. But then when Linares fought Lomachenko so tough, and dropped Lomachenko and was right in the fight at the time he got stopped basically by one shot, then that speaks well of Luke Campbell because he hung in there well with Linares, went the distance, gave him a good fight after being knocked down early. And then for him now to avenge the loss to Mendy, and Mendy in his own right is a legitimate fringe contender, a guy on the fringe of the top 10. He's not a nobody. I think that Campbell, to me, now through this series of events in his own last couple of fights, he has solidified his position as a legit lightweight contender. But like Jeremiah accurately summed up, the problem for Campbell is that he really doesn't seem to have enough where he's going to threaten that top of the division. I think Jeremiah makes a good point. In theory, if he was to fight guys like Easter or Comey, he could be competitive with those guys, but that's probably going to be the ceiling, unless the other guys clear out.
All right, next up, we've got Anthony with Joshua defended his portion of the unified title with a 7th-round stoppage of of Alexander Povetkin. John, what was your take on the fight?
For me, it was what I expected. I tweeted out before the fight that I thought that Joshua would stop him within about 6, so it was 7. So for me, it was pretty much what was expected. I thought, and I've said it on our show a lot of times, and I've thought it over the years. I just, thought Povetkin's performance against Klitschko was miserable years back, and I think it's just he can't handle that type of a fighter, a tall guy with power like that, who's got some other abilities. And I think frankly this result wouldn't have been much different if Joshua would have fought the Povetkin that fought Klitschko. So I just think it was not a good style matchup for Povetkin. I don't think Wilder would have been either. And for me, it was kind of what I expected. I give Joshua props for taking care of business. He was a pretty significant favor in the fight, but as I've said a lot of times on here, I do give points for taking care of business, and I think Joshua did that, which he didn't do quite as well against Parker and Takam. So, I think he's right there. I think Joshua's good. I think Wilder's good. I think maybe some people are undervaluing those guys really at this point, even though they're the top 2. And I think these guys are good. I think the heavyweight division is on an upswing. I look at the Klitschko era kind of like the Larry Holmes era. You had, the Klitschkos at the top in the Klitschko era, and they were very strong. The guys below that weren't very strong. I think Larry Holmes was very strong, and the guys below him weren't that strong. And I think we're transitioning eras right now.
Well, I don't think there was any Ken Nortons or Mike Weaver in the Klitschko area, though.
Yeah, arguably there were some guys in the Holmes era that were better fighters, like
or Jerry Cooney.
But I don't know, Mike. Jerry. I think you have a tough time, frankly, making a case for a Jerry Cooney. Ernie Shavers was very limited. He had tremendous punching power, but he wasn't. Or let's face it, Ernie wasn't a great all-around fighter.
So you think that Alexander Povetkin would have beat Ernie Shavers?
No, I don't think he would have.
That's my point, though. I'm not saying they were great fighters, but I'm saying they're a hell of a lot better than the guys that, were challenging Klitschko.
Yeah, but even when I look at that era, though, I know he fought Holmes twice, but, to me, Ernie Shavers, even though he hung around a long time, he was already, the guys came up earlier then. They had more fights. I mean, to me, like Norton, I don't even consider him, even though he had one of the greatest fights I've ever seen. Holmes Norton was arguably the best fight I've ever seen. So obviously he had a legendary fight with Larry Holmes, but to me, Shavers, Norton, those were like Ali era guys. I don't really put them as that heart of the Holmes era. Now, Mike Weaver I would, but Mike Weaver was so up and down. He could have a great night where he would look like he could be competitive with anybody, and then he would have a night where he would just be dreadful.
Those guys were a hell of a lot better than the Calvin Brocks and the Derek Jeffersons and old Hasima Rahman.
I do think they're better than those guys. I can't argue with you there. They were better fighters, but it just wasn't a strong overall era. The Klitschko era wasn't. I mean, yeah. Could you make an argument the Holmes era was better than the Klitschko era? Yeah, I'd agree with you there.
It was a lot better, John. Come on, just admit it.
I don't think I'm going to argue that point, but they're both not good heavyweight eras. That's all.
Well, when you look at it, though, how many eras are good heavyweight eras? There's not a whole lot.
Not a lot.
I mean, even like with Joe Louis, there weren't a lot of guys for Joe Louis to fight. And really, I think that's where people go. Because if you look, the 60s, 70s, that's a good heavyweight era. I think the 90s might have been the best heavyweight era. Late 80s, into the 90s, or into the late 90s.
I think the 90s after the 70s now, and I'll admit, it just shows you how sometimes you can harken back too much. When the 90s was ongoing, I do remember arguing with other boxing people saying, this era isn't that good, and some of these Holmes guys might have beat some of these guys. But as the era went on, I realized that was not the case. And I think now historians are really starting to agree that after the 70s, arguably the 90s was the best heavyweight era, and there's probably a real good case for that.
All right. Now, what was our topic we were talking about to begin with, John? Or Jeremiah. Jeremiah. Povetkin, Joshua. This is the thing. I had Povetkin up 4-2 in the fight until he got starched. So I actually think this. I think what I saw was Joshua actually show some ability against a boxer who was giving him some trouble. And the thing that impressed me was the way he took him out, Jeremiah.
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, if you're looking for a typical result, and you assume this is going to be, a bit easy, like John seems to think that it was. I mean, most people, you poll them, and they had it 3-3, 4-2 Povetkin. In fact, most of the people that I saw had it about 3-3, and I thought that was perfectly reasonable. I think if you had Povetkin up 4-2, I could see that as well. I mean, it was one of those things where. Early on in the going, and of course, I've talked about Povetkin at length in previous episodes, and you could see that he's very good at opening a fighter up. I mean, and you can see that he's been fighting tall guys for a long time. I mean, there are a couple of times where he clipped Joshua with an overhand right over the jab. I mean, he's been doing it for years and years, but he's nuanced. I mean, he understands how to open you up. I mean, he'll do subtle things like he'll shift his upper body to the left, and then he'll throw an overhand right. You saw the 3-punch combination in the first round, which got Joshua's attention and busted his nose. I don't know if it became broken or not. I know there was a lot of speculation around that. I haven't heard any follow-up data in regards to that. But, just in the, some of the lead left hooks that he were throwing were really nice. I mean, the guy's got great technique. I mean, he's a thinker there. And I said this before, he's a thinker in an era of a bunch of big lumbering heavyweights. And I've always found that refreshing. I mean, some of the stuff that he did was unfortunate and whatnot, but he showed that even at this age he had some boxing ability. He gave Joshua trouble, and a lot of people were, I thought most people. I mean, I was following a number of Brits on Facebook as the fight was happening, and they weren't making it seem as if Joshua was dominating or clearly the victor here. I mean, they saw it as a competitive fight, and that Joshua was flustered in parts and didn't look comfortable a lot of times. But I give him a lot of credit because he showed that he could adjust as well. I mean, he was jabbing low to the body, and ultimately that's what helped set up the right-hand shot over the top. And one thing that I think a lot of people should like about Josh was when he has a guy hurt, he goes and gets it. I mean, his follow-up shots are accurate. His punch placement is really nice. He's got good variety. I mean, for a big guy, he's pretty quick and powerful. I mean, he's not, a real big. He's not a puncher, like in the Klitschko sense, but because he's accurate and he's able to follow it up and he's quick, he's going to be a handful for anybody out there. And I commend both of them for a good performance, and it's a learning. I think in Joshua's favor, it's a learning experience for him, and I think he'll be a better fighter because of it.
Yeah, and I think when I look at this, to me, there's no comparison between Joshua and Wilder now. Just because the competition they've faced, John. I mean, and the competition they've beaten. Because still...
Well, I think...
Go ahead.
No, I think... I think it's well, it's not funny, but it's like... Yeah, I think it is like a day-by-day, month-by-month thing. I mean, I even picked Wilder over Joshua for a while. I would agree as of today, September 27th, is... Joshua's resume better as of today? Yes, it's better as of today. But when you look at December 1st, if Wilder has
if Wilder, now. If you give me a choice as a 50-year-old man to get in a ring with Tyson Fury or Alexander Povetkin, I'm choosing Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury hasn't shown anything in 3 years, and really it's debatable whether he showed anything 3 years ago. But even if he beats Wilder, he'll beat Wilder and Ortiz. Or he'll beat Fury and Ortiz. I mean, you got Povetkin, Parker, Takam, Klitschko, Molina, which is a guy that, your guy beat too, I think.
Wilder knocked out.
Yeah, same thing that happened to him when he fought against Joshua. Dillian White. I mean, hell, right now you're looking at a guy that's beaten half of the top 10.
Yeah, you do have that, but you're going to have Wilder will have come off of, let's say Wilder knocks out Fury. You know, if Wilder's coming off a knockout of Ortiz and he's coming a knockout off of Fury, the last guy to win the title in the ring who was undefeated, you know, you're going to be able to, I think you're going to be able to make a strong case that Wilder should be the number one guy, or I think you'll get this more around fight time. I think there are, and I agree with those. I think that you have to adjust, and you know, Fury being out and having tested positive for a PED, you can't recognize him as the current lineal champion.
It was the rampant cocaine use and the 450 pounds that I hold against him.
Right, but I care about that in terms of the significance about who's in the driver's seat to be the top guy. I think that Wilder coming off a KO of Ortiz, and then again, let's say he knocks out Fury, he's knocked out an undefeated guy who was the last guy to win the title in the ring. You know, I think then you're going to be able to make a case for Wilder being the top guy on December 1st, but he's got to do that, and we don't know what's going to happen there. In Fury's defense, if Fury does that to Wilder, he's going to then be able to say, well, I won the title in the ring against Vladimir Klitschko, who was on an 11-year run. I took on a guy that was number 2 and undefeated in Deontay Wilder, who knocked out everybody he ever faced. I went to the U.S. I beat him. Heck, I'm really.
You there, John? John? Did we lose John? Jeremiah?
I don't know if we lost him, but
we didn't lose him, but he went silent.
Yeah, well, he's up in them He's up in those West Virginia Appalachians or whatever, you know, picking on the banjo. So it might have messed with the reception or something.
Huh. Okay, now he's off. So, well, I guess we'll hit this button and get him back.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Long trip from Jersey, maybe.
I'm back.
All right,
having
go
some
ahead.
technical difficulties, I guess. Okay, what's the last you heard of me before we?
Hell,
had
I
some
don't know.
technical
You
difficulties?
said it. You should know before I do.
So, well, no. So he's asking about.
It's about Tyson
John,
Fury being something because he beats up Deontay Wilder, who's never really been.
I was just saying, yeah. In Fury's defense, if Fury beats Wilder on December 1st, and then he's the last guy to win the title in the ring against Vladimir Klitschko, coming off an 11-year run, and he beats the number 2 guy who had knocked out every opponent he's ever faced. He's going to have a good case for saying he should be reinstated as the lineal champion. So Joshua's got the number 1 spot at the moment, but that's in flux going into December 1st.
Jeremiah, agree or disagree on the last 5 minutes?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you look at, the rankings, and I know this is definitely true of transnational. I mean, we like to be fluid and, we want it to be live and whatnot and, make sure it changes with the times and it's accurate. But you look at their last 4 opponents, and I think that's it's hard to gauge what exactly everybody's using for a metric to rate somebody, number 1 or 2 or whatever, how far exactly they go back. Because, people fight, about 2 times a year. And so you look at Deontay Wilder's recent resume, and you have, Gerald Washington, you've got Bermain Stavern, you have Luis Ortiz, you got Chris Areola, with Tyson Fury next. Okay, so if we're summing up, let's just use the last 4 opponents, just for the sake. I think you guys would agree that's okay. But Gerald Washington, Bermain Stavern, Luis Ortiz, and then Tyson Fury, and then you compare that to Anthony Joshua, who had Takam, he had Parker, Povetkin. I think. I mean, it's really tough because I think you touched on a good point, Mike, about just in this day and age, it's so hard to tell how good a guy really is. And with Tyson Fury's performance over Klitschko, I mean, there are a lot of questions. I mean, besides the performance being,
the fight was shit. I mean, it was two guys standing there staring at each other. And I'm sorry, I don't care what Tyson Fury. I believe this. I believed at one point that Tyson Fury would possibly bore Deontay Wilder to death and win a decision. But I think what's going to happen is Deontay Wilder is going to walk out and he's going to knock him out. Because Tyson Fury was basically in a cocaine-induced haze for 2 years. That is usually not conducive to winning anything against anybody any good. And if you look at his last two performances, they were terrible. And the fact that people thought he looked better this last performance than the fight against Sefer Seferi will tell you how bad he is now. And I just don't see it. I don't want to see Tyson Fury fight Deontay Wilder. And to tell you the truth, I really don't want to see Tyson Fury fight anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's just again, it's hard to read into it. I mean, Tyson Fury, he had the performance against Klitschko, and some people are putting it on a pedestal, but it was, was it a Styles thing? I mean, that could be what it is. Fury might not actually be that good of a heavyweight. I mean, he deserved the recognition for taking the crown from the king, but it's hard to tell where exactly he's at right now. And if you compare again those four. Assuming Wilder wins, you compare those four to Joshua's last four of Takam and Parker and Povetkin. I just, like personally, I see Povetkin as a better fighter than Ortiz. Parker at this point, he's probably lesser than even this Tyson Fury. I mean, we've never been that impressed by him, though he was a top 5 guy. So you have Takam, who's about a fringe guy too, and collectively, again, I think I'll have to make a judgment to see what Tyson Fury looks like. But collectively, Joshua's competition still looks better in my opinion.
John,
I don't disagree that Joshua's overall competition is better, and especially with something like, and I said this would reflect indirectly on Joshua, and you got to be fair to him. Charles Martin came to fight against Konatsky and fought well in the second half of the fight. So, I think, and Dominic Brazil is very limited, but he's shown some heart in other fights. I actually still think, Joshua's performances against Martin and Brazil might be his. Not saying they're the best guys. I'm not even going to make that argument necessarily they're the best guys he fought, but that those might be his best performances. So, those performances were really good. And, I'm not saying Joshua hasn't faced overall better depth, but I just think that, Fury and Wilder stepped up to fight each other. And, Wilder, he's got the knockout of Ortiz, who was undefeated and was, really considered a dangerous opponent. And, he beat Stavern when Stavern was a legit top 10 guy in the first fight. So, he's got his wins now too. And, again, we're talking about in theory post the Fury fight. And I'm not saying, I'm not changing my position. I thought the Klitschko Fury heavyweight lineal title fight was the worst heavyweight lineal title fight of all time. But, Fury got the official win.
Go back and watch Ali Evangelista.
It's going to be tough to beat Klitschko Fury.
Oh, it can.
It
can.
Fury got the he got the official win. I like traditional the traditional divisions to have lineal champs. I think Transnational and Ring are doing a good job of trying to sort of assist and fill in those spots without getting away from their principles. And I especially care about it. For me in the junior and super divisions, I don't care about it that much. But I do care about it at heavyweight, light heavyweight, middleweight, et cetera, the traditional division. So I pay attention to it at heavyweight, and I think you should because the boxing's history is so important. So, I think that, I'm again looking ahead and at the morning of December 2nd after Fury Wilder, I just think that the winner of that fight really might be able to make their case that they should be recognized as the champ. And don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean I don't think whoever wins that shouldn't be showing down with Joshua, and we can debate, why, but I do feel that even though Joshua's faced some good competition for the heavyweight division, I do feel that Hearn has avoided the Wilder fight. So I look at it like Hearn got outflanked, and Wilder and Fury are taking each other on, and I'm sure he wasn't expecting that in a million years. And,
Hey, John.
He may have to pay the price for that now.
Hey, John, just a quick question. I mean, does it matter, how much does it matter if the performance, if Wilder and Fury's a snooze fest and, Wilder happens to edge him? I mean, does that affect your opinion on the matter that much?
Yeah, technically it shouldn't, but I got to agree. Let's be honest, it probably does, because you're right. After the way, I think Wilder's much more aggressive than Vladimir Klitschko, but the way the two big men in that fight fought, if somehow it turns into a snooze fest and it's a split decision for one of these guys, you're not going to feel as. I'll reserve my judgment to that morning, and it technically shouldn't matter in my analysis here, but there might be a reality that it might affect that perception a little bit, that if you're going to say the winner of that fight's the guy and it's a snooze fest and a split decision or something like that, you're not going to feel real good about that, and that's probably going to help Hearn and Joshua a little bit. But that's something we're just not going to know about for another 60 days or so.
All right. Jeremiah, what's your opinion? Do you think that Hearn and Joshua are ducking Wilder?
Well, I don't think they're ducking. I think Hearn is trying to marinate the fight, and I do think John is right. I do think he did get outflanked here, because I think Hearn's long-term plan was probably to, fight Povetkin in the autumn, and then, fight Wilder in the spring of 2019, and then, build up to a big Tyson Fury fight. So, again, I do think he got outmaneuvered, but I don't think there's any ducking involved. I mean, I think that word is much too overused. I mean, a lot we as boxing fans like to cut our losses, and you see it all over the forums, whether it's whether you go to Twitter, whether you go to Facebook and browse around the groups. A lot of people are this so and so's ducking, this person's ducking, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of times it turns out to be baloney, and then they don't worry about the egg on their face when the time comes. But I think that they both realize that, even if the division is on an upswing, which John could be right. I mean, there are some interesting prospects coming up, guys like Kuzman and Joe Joyce and Teslenko and Herkovic. I can't even say his name properly, but, Tony Yoka, and all these other guys who had strong amateur backgrounds. It's right now, all there really is the winner of Fury and Wilder and Joshua. And they both know that. Eventually, even Hearn's talking about, going to the negotiating table recently. So, in my opinion, it happens. I'm not really even all that concerned about it.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on. Was there anybody else who wanted to say anything about this? I don't think so, is there?
Just since Jeremiah, I think it fits with this weekend, so I think I can cut ahead to it with what Jeremiah just said. We're talking about the heavyweight division on the upswing and the prospects. Now you've got Al Heyman Joyce has signed with Al Heyman. He's training with Abel Sanchez in the United States. I think the U.S. still is kind of the place to be for boxing when it comes to things like that and establishing yourself compared to anywhere else. And Joyce is going to try to do it that way. And he's going to be fighting on national TV in the U.S. Sunday night on FS1. F.A. Ajagba, who's my favorite prospect out there, the Nigerian who's based in the U.S., and he's with Ronnie Shields, so same type formula, and Heyman. He's also going to be fighting on TV in the card. So I like that. You've got Joyce. He's fighting that Kalaidze, that experienced guy who's been stopped a couple times against decent opposition. Ajagba's not fighting a known guy, but, we remember the last guy didn't even want to get in the ring with him. So I think seeing those two guys on the same card on national TV in the U.S. is going to be a good thing Sunday night.
All right. I'm hoping some other guys will step up, because I think Joshua needs some more competition. I don't think – my prediction is this. I don't think Tyson Fury's going to fight Deontay Wilder. I've been saying it for a month. I still don't think. I think Fury's going to pull out. I don't think it's anything on Wilder's side. I just don't see the fight happening. And if it does, I think it's going to be over quickly because I don't think Tyson Fury is in any shape to fight. Today, after 45 years, more than 1,000 fights, and some of the most lucrative and disputed matches of all time, HBO is throwing in the towel on professional boxing. What started with a monumental upset seen by a relative handful of customers, George Foreman's knockout of heavyweight champion Joe Frazier in 1973, will come to a close at Madison Square Garden on October the 27th. What's your take on this, Jeremiah?
Oh man, I mean, I'm not terribly broken up by it. I mean, it's been a rocky ride, just like anything. If it
stops Max Kellerman from doing boxing broadcast, I'm good with
it. I don't give these guys as hard of a time as others. I mean, Lampley's become even. I think Lampley's become even harder to listen to just because he's so damn emotional. Jesus, I mean, I don't know what the dude's going for, but he sounds like. The dude's needs some testosterone replacement therapy because he's talking more like a pansy and he's crying all the time. I mean, the dude he's been around.
Showing emotion as a man, is there, John?
There's just the HBO was not. HBO did not finish up on a high note. I'd just say that, or they still got a few fights to go. But
their pay-per-view attempt. Was as big a joke as the scoring. Go ahead and continue, Jeremiah.
Yeah, the fact that they had no 4 6-rounders, to inject in that pay-per-view, or again, I said this before, they could have just run a 4-rounder or 6-rounder and then played, the damn 24/7. That would have hyped people up.
At $85 a pop, shouldn't we get naked ring card girls?
They gotta adjust their strategy next time because this. I mean, to be honest,
do this, John. You love boxing, right? But would you rather see 2 4-rounders that aren't that good, or would you rather see those Tecate girls get up there and show us their boobs?
Well, not gonna comment, but we've got Tecate girls in there anyway, so.
And maybe we can get the Tecate girls in like a wet T-shirt contest with Jarrell Miller.
But we're not going to have to worry about that. That's all theoretical because HBO is not going to have any more pay-per-views. It's over. So
yeah,
that's maybe the end.
Well, hopefully Bob Arum can adjust.
All I was just going to add is I got a lot of great memories of HBO. A lot of the best fights. Or the biggest fights I ever went to live were televised by HBO. But with that said, I never liked and I've talked about it on our show a lot. I've never liked the premium cable model. I think it was what was a big part of boxing's deterioration in general. And I saw some good arguments on Twitter today from people that have been around saying because there's some truth to this that. After Mancini came, the networks, were squeamish because the advertisers were getting squeamish, even though the ratings were great. And, they weren't showing as many fights. But I've always felt that, if the premium wasn't there, that one of the networks probably would have still had something on consistently and it would have been better exposure or at the very least on basic cable. So I just never cared for this model. HBO had some great production. I have some great memories of it personally, but it wasn't a model that I ever really liked that much. And, I think in that sense, I'm not that broken up about it like Jeremiah said, because I just haven't, Showtime's still there and they've had some good fights, but I just haven't liked the premium cable model for boxing.
Yeah, and the other thing is this. You can get DAZN in the ESPN Plus app for the same price as you get for HBO anyways, Jeremiah.
Yeah, and you get far more fights. I mean, but I was going to say if
and no Max Kellerman, that's the most important thing in all of this.
Exactly. Well, no, actually, I heard today that Kellerman will probably be picking up more duties on ESPN because he's been working over there for years.
Well, now they're going to put him with Stephen A. Smith probably, and we'll have 2 people talk that I don't want to hear.
I have no idea why they put Stephen A. Smith on anything. I mean, the dude's he's not some monumental figure that, people gravitate towards, at least not that I'm aware of, certainly not in boxing. But, to take your wet T-shirt contest thing a little bit further, instead of the Tecate girls, I mean, the top the top ranked chicks are, they're hot. So, let's get that going. Hopefully you're listening.
So what you're saying is maybe topless boxing for 4-rounders when fights end too soon and there's a little bit of time left.
What I'm saying is we need to reinvigorate this sport. And if I was a promoter, I would put topless boxing on, and then I'd throw those YouTubers in there, and then I'd stack, some legitimate fighters after that. So I think that's actually a good way to sell. But, HBO boxing, it is one of those things where I enjoyed tons and tons of fights, and, they had a lot of great stuff on there, like, Gotti, Ward. We all enjoyed that stuff, and they had some great stuff.
But this is the thing. The thing I remember is this. I live in Indiana, and I was out in the country, so I couldn't get HBO and all that stuff till like 1993 or 94. But I remember going to my grandma's house, and I used to have to watch Lawrence Welk with her before the fights. But if I would watch the PBS rerun of Lawrence Welk, we would watch boxing. And I remember seeing Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson that way. Watch some George Foreman comebacks on HBO that way. Chavez against Taylor, I watched it that way. So my point is this. As John said, Indiana, I think it was bad. Because if my grandma didn't live in a place where she got cable, I wouldn't have even been able to see those fights.
And that was the problem with the whole premium cable is that, if you're a boxing fan and you go far enough back, or even if you follow the history, the TV history of it, that's when the majority started to not see the fights, and you started to not be able to talk to a lot of people in general about boxing because they just weren't seeing the fights anymore because there were a lot of people that didn't have HBO, especially back then. So it was really where boxing's fan base started to drop off, and they started that. At first it was TVKO, which was really HBO pay-per-view. They just tried calling it TVKO at first, and they started running that a lot in the start of the 90s, and that's when too many fights were going on onto pay-per-view.
Show, wasn't it Foreman and Holyfield?
Yeah, and that was 1991. Yeah. And then, initially the idea was for some of the fights, like, now you would look back at this as a good value, but you didn't have to pay before that. You were getting that just on your regular HBO, like Tony McCallum. They were having those for 1995, Holmes, Mercer, but, and this is in 1991 money. But, once they started running a monthly, and I remember Arum being involved in that, and he was pushing that idea of the, Bob Arum was heavily behind that once a month pay-per-view thing. And so you're paying for your HBO and you're paying for your basically your HBO pay-per-view, which was then called TVKO. Then they just changed the name to HBO pay-per-view. And then at the very end, as all three of us know, where it was really an outrage, and I got really disgusted, and I think most people probably did with HBO, was when your fight that should have been on regular HBO and would have been 20 years ago became HBO pay-per-view, and you were paying for HBO, and they were running a pay-per-view at you every month or two. It just got absurd.
Yeah, and if people don't remember, Meldrick Taylor, Julio Cesar Chavez was not pay-per-view.
Regular HBO.
Yeah. So I think we've all agreed it's not that big a deal. And Max Kellerman, hopefully, they put him on maybe they'll put him on ESPN baseball or something. All right, we got a big fight this weekend. George Groves will fight in the World Boxing Super Series Championship against Callum Smith, live on DAZN, which now we love DAZN since there's no HBO. This is an interesting fight, style matchup-wise. Jeremiah, who do you favor? Who do you got?
Who do I got? Yeah, well, I have George Groves. It's not an easy pick. That's precisely why, I gathered up the team and I was like, hey, you guys want to do a prediction thing for this? Because I've noticed, and I know where John stands, I've noticed that there's a lot of division here. And, it's because George Groves is, the guy's got talent, but he's inconsistent, so it's, and not only that, he's past his best. After, he got his lights put out by Carl Froch at, 80,000 in Wembley. That was pretty. It's been a slow downhill roll ever since. But I like Groves. I think currently he is the best super middleweight in the world. based on resume. I wouldn't favor him over anybody. I wouldn't favor him over Benitez, or I think Uzdegai would be a damn tough fight for him too. But just based on what he's done, I mean, the guy's got a really good jab. His movement is good. His punching power is good. But the problem I've always had with him is he's got good speed, and his sense of distance and timing. It's all pretty good, but he just misses an odd amount of shots. Like it's not like he doesn't have this hair trigger brain where he's on it immediately, and he's landing these accurate shots. He seemed to me to be oddly inaccurate for a guy who was able to compete on the world stage like himself. But the reason I favor him mostly is because Callum Smith, as you guys know, he's been hot and cold in his performances, and I would say even a bit colder with his recent performances in the World Boxing Super Series. He just hasn't. And not only that, the thing, and I've noted this before when we've talked about it in the past, he has a stereotypical kind of European style, especially with the Germans. A lot of those guys flash, the Sturms and Abrahams of the world, where they fight behind a high, tight guard, and they don't move their damn head as much as they should. I mean, the defense is just too simple, and those guys have a tendency to be outworked. Fortunately, Groves is not a high work rate kind of guy, but I do think that, with his hands pinned to his chin, he's going to have a tough time beating George Groves to the punch. I think, Groves is going to flick the jab out there a lot. He's going to move. Callum Smith is going to find some difficulty in tracking him down. But I do think it could go the other way if Callum Smith moves his hands. But I just think Groves is a bit too savvy for him at this point. I think he's going to, again, work behind the jab, and that's really going to be the primary punch, the primary scoring punch of the fight. And that's what's going to do it for him. I think eventually Callum Smith is going to open up later in the rounds because the jab is working pretty well. And I think Groves will find, some shots with the right hand. And, I think he'll decision him. I don't really see a knockout here. But yeah, it's a good fight, and it's interesting that it's in Saudi Arabia. I wonder what the ring card girls are going to be wearing there.
I don't know. All right. When I see this fight, I think Groves wins too, and it's not because I think anything great of George Groves. I do think he's a solid boxer, but the thing that stands out to me is this tournament, that's most of what I've seen of Callum Smith, and he struggled against Skoglund, and then the thing that really got me was not being able to put away Holskin, who was basically a kickboxer. So I see Groves winning this fight also. What do you think, Jeremiah?
You mean John?
Yeah, John, whatever.
Yeah, Jeremiah's got his part out there, so I'll throw mine in.
Maybe I was going to let him change his mind if he wanted. Go ahead.
let me just put. Sorry for those that love the super middleweight division, but I'm going to frame it in two ways. So let me, before I make my pick and analysis, tell you. I'll look at it this way. First of all, we don't need a super middleweight division, and I think it's seen by what you got at the top of this division right now. If this was rolled into the light heavyweights like you would have had it traditionally, you've got guys that wouldn't be top 10 light heavyweights, and we're talking about tournament champions and lineal champions and things like that in the ring, which I have agreed with their recent decisions, but I don't agree with this one. I'm with Transnational on this fight. I don't think that this is a 168-pound, lineal title fight, so to speak. I don't even really look at lineal and junior super divisions, but if you want to say the champion, whatever you want to call it in those, I don't think it's worthy of it. And I'm going to say this then, though, realizing as time goes on, and as much as I don't like it and you try to fight it, there's some people you're never going to convince that there shouldn't be 168-pound super middleweight division. So what I would say to those people is, if you believe we need this division, then certainly this division at the moment is one of the worst in boxing from top to bottom. So I think that I like to put it in that perspective because, these guys are, Groves is solid, but I think we just really have to keep it in perspective. My own opinion is, even though he has not looked as good lately, I think Gilberto Ramirez beats these guys, and I think David Benavidez, despite his recent personal troubles, I think he probably beats these guys. But with all that said, Groves is solid. He did his job against Eubank Jr. He clearly won that fight. I think Jeremiah made an excellent point that I also noticed in the Eubank Jr. fight, though, is, and I think it's one of the most underrated things about the talent, especially when you look at is punch accuracy. Groves, he has some skills, but as Jeremiah in the Eubank fight, the guy was unbelievably wide open, just swinging around like somebody fighting in the parking lot of a pub, and Groves couldn't time him to take him out with a right hand. He just wasn't that accurate, even though he did his job. So this is a tough one because Callum Smith, I picked him going into the tournament. I was kind of high on him as a prospect because I liked his size, and for maybe to me, compared to the stereotypical British prospect outside of somebody like Anthony Joshua, who is a big puncher. Callum Smith looked to me like a guy that could punch, but you see him against Skoglund, you see him against Holskin, who was on short notice, but he got a couple of days notice and couldn't be hurt on him. I was having trouble with him. Have it almost even. They've got Groves a very, very slight favorite. It's hard to call even who's going to win fights, never mind exactly how they play out. This one, I just see something razor close, not a great entertaining fight, or maybe Smith with his height can just keep Groves off him enough and just land enough punches that I think maybe he wins a decision where a lot of Groves, you got people both sides of it, but I think Smith's just going to squeak one out here, but I think that there's not too much in terms of what's going to happen.
Did we lose John again?
Yeah, I don't know. His phone's been breaking up a bit.
All right, Jeremiah.
Okay, I'm still here.
Oh, there we go.
There he is.
Go ahead.
I just don't think there's much to separate these guys, but I think maybe Smith squeaks out a fight that a lot of people might think Groves won, but Smith comes away with a tight decision.
Yeah, let me address something real quick. John talked about how the ring they're going to put their title on the line for this fight. I understand the rationale from Doug Fisher. He's like, oh well, let's. I'm not even sure why Callum Smith is number 3 to begin with. That's just my take on the matter. So first off, I disagree with the placement, but secondly, he's saying that the fighters that are taking risks should be rewarded, and that does make some sense to me. My problem with the whole premise is that even no matter who wins this fight, nobody is going to see them as the man at 168. Nobody's going to see them as the best, right? I mean, if George Groves was fighting Gilberto Ramirez, I think people would be warmer to that. I think they'd receive that a little bit warmer than him versus Callum Smith, again, who's been, relatively cold in his last few performances. So that's kind of the difference there. Is the ring feels like the people who are taking the risk should be rewarded, and I do understand that. But from transnational, standpoint, it's just these guys aren't really. Groves is seen as the number one guy, and I think he should be. But Callum Smith really isn't widely seen as the number 2 guy. So that's my problem there, is that even though this will be for their title, it won't be seen as like the number 1 and number 2 guys getting it on and adding clarity to the division.
All right. In other news, Billy Joe Saunders is not a good person. Anybody want to make any comments there? And I'm not talking about the drugs. I'm talking about he did offer a woman drugs in exchange for a sexual act, so at least he didn't ask for a freebie, Jeremiah.
Yeah, you got to give him credit there. I mean, the man's at least making her work for it. But yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, and his other charades, I thought Saunders just comes across as kind of like the British Adrian Broner. He's a loudmouth. He doesn't seem to. It's odd that his fights continuously get pushed back, or there's always something going on, and then you see this sort of crap going on. Like with him offering crack to a lady, and he got fined 100,000, I believe, euros for that, by the British Boxing Board of Commissions. And so, he's been punished. He definitely got his just due in that. The drug testing thing, I will touch upon just briefly because, it's hard to say with these things, but There was a statement that was put out recently for what Saunders tested positive for. So the British Boxing Board of Commissions came out with a statement saying that this is considered out of competition testing, and the substance that was found in Billy Joe Saunders' body is not something that is considered a violation when it's out of competition. So he's still got the green light to fight, and nothing is being affected there. But still, I've seen from a lot of my British buddies, he's still widely viewed as a jerk there, and he's not doing himself any favors by being a fat ass. Through in between fights and whatnot. So yeah, that's the statement released, and I think a lot of us feel as if he can do better.
Hey, I came out with that before they came out with that too, didn't I? I told you that today. Remember?
Yeah, you did. Well, they actually brought something up that you didn't say is, I guess it's also and you kind of broadly touched on this when we were talking off air, but I guess this is something that can be found in nasal sprays. So so I guess it's not that serious. Let's not hang him by the.
I would say the more serious thing is the social media video of him offering drugs for sex. That's probably a little bit worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
But all right, anybody got anything else they want to talk about? John?
I think it's worth. Saunders has obviously had a troubled week, and he does seem to have some talent. He doesn't fight as aggressively as I think he should a lot of times for the talent he has. And then now he's got some of the out of the ring stuff. We'll see how it plays out. But I think it's worth noting that, because I think it's a good move. There's only so much you can do, and the guy has to listen. But I think for especially one fight, it could be enough to get him close to turning it around. Sergey Kovalev is bringing Buddy McGirt in as his trainer for this Alvarez rematch. And McGirt's a guy that has enough boxing knowledge and training ability. I think he's real underrated. When he works with guys, you see him doing certain things better. And, Kovalev, maybe he won't listen. He's got a reputation as a guy that's hard to get to listen. But, maybe if he just listens a little bit going into this fight, I think McGirt's a guy that could help him. And with the way he was winning that first fight, if this coupling stays together through the actual fight, I think Kovalev might have a chance to turn it around.
Yeah, but if he's just a front runner the way you think, he should not have any chance to beat Alvarez, should he? Because you're probably not going to knock out Alvarez quickly.
Well, I'm looking at it as, McGirt might be able to get him in better shape, and maybe to at least survive 12 rounds, he can get him to defend the right hand better, because Kovalev's just so open for right hands. But, he can't implant fortitude in him, but
I think he already had that, John. I don't think he could have beat the guys he did without it. I just think he's older. I mean, he's mid-30s now, if not older.
Yeah, he's mid-30s, but Alvarez is mid-30s as well. So
yeah, but everybody ages differently. I've seen guys that were done. Ray Mancini was done at 26 or 27. So everybody's done at a different time. There's not too many Bernard Hopkins out there. Thank God.
No, but I think Kovalev. I think Kovalev with McGirt, if it stays together, I think Kovalev might be able to turn this result around.
Oh, I think he could win.
Yeah,
I saw him beat Andre Ward. That's all I can say. So I'll never down him. I'll never call him a front runner, just because if you're good enough to beat Andre Ward, you're a hell of a fighter.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. I think, it is unfortunate, and I've been over this a number of times. It is unfortunate that these Eastern European guys come over to, the pro game so damn late. I mean, a lot of these guys are already, 30 plus. Gvozdyk, Peter Biev, Bivol is relatively young compared to the rest, but I still think he's 26.
Hey, let me ask you a question,
came over
real quick. Doesn't Peter Biev sound like something your mom caught you doing in your room when you were 12?
Yeah, like I was in there panting to a fuzzy tape, trying to adjust the bunny ears, and just catch a nip slip or something, So, it does sound.
Mom, I would just beat her Biev. Go ahead.
yeah, but it's just unfortunate that they come over here late. But I did want to just throw out a few things quickly before we close out the show. You were talking about, bad people. Well, Victor Ortiz is scrapped from his headliner because he's being tried for rape. So that is a serious offense. And he deserved to be scrapped from it. And, I don't wish him the best of luck in prison. I did want to say, Pablo Baez, we miss you. If you're listening, please call up to the show one time. We'd love to chat with you. Another thing, too, is that there was another bit of news. Give me just a second here. There was another bit of news that I saw that I wanted to touch on. Yeah, I can't remember what it was. But lastly, Joe Rogan had Teddy Atlas on his Joe Rogan Experience. It's 3 hours long. I haven't gotten through all of it. But if you're a boxing fan, I highly recommend watching it. I mean, it's really fantastic. Listening to it. I know people have mixed feelings on Atlas, and they do with a lot of ESPN guys and guys who are generally in the spotlight. But the podcast is really what podcasts are made for. I mean, it's this long form conversation, and Joe Rogan shuts up a lot of time, and he just lets Atlas talk. And Atlas is telling these old stories about New York and the amateur ranks, and he has a sizable bit on Mike Tyson and how that history is, and he's talking about corruption in the sport, and he sounds a lot like us at times when he's talking about the corruption of the officials, and he just sounds like a guy who has the best interest of the guys. He sounds like a guy who's genuinely involved in the sport and really loves it. And, he's been at it for so long that there's just a lot of appeal there. And I promise you, if you check it out, you won't regret it. It's excellent.
All right, guys. John, anything else, or are you good to go?
Just one more comment. Want to get it on the record now because it's been signed officially. I'm personally, because I see people who are knowledgeable saying good fight and tight one and things like that. I just think that Gvozdzik is going to destroy Stevenson. I'm surprised Stevenson's taking the fight. So I want to get that. And for me, that's the guy that I can't – on December 1st, I would bet on Adonis Stevenson pulling out before Tyson Fury pulls out against Wilder.
I'll bet on
but if he goes through with
it –
I just think that Gvozdzik's gonna tear him apart, and I don't. The people who are knowledgeable who are saying they expect that to be close, and the odds makers may disagree with me. I haven't seen a line on it yet, but I'm going to put myself on a limb on that one. I know Gvozdyk has had some performances where he hasn't looked as good. Hasn't looked as good to me, but there are certain guys. I think he's one. Gilberto Ramirez. They're fighting the competition that they know is not on their level, and they're just fighting down to the level of competition that, when we've seen them against better guys, we know what they can do. Gilberto Ramirez, he beat Maxim Vlasov, who's been fighting really well at cruiserweight. He's in that second tournament. I think people forget about that fight, for example.
I saw that fight. I saw that fight live.
Yeah, that was a good fight too, but I think that like Gvozdyk, when you look at Gvozdyk against Yuneski Gonzalez, who's real tough, and he showed in the past what kind of heart he has, and the Cuban, and you see him against Chilemba, who we know has been going the distance with all the good guys, including Bivol most recently, and Gvozdyk stops him. I think Gvozdyk, when he's got a chance against Stevenson here, he's just been looking for some opportunity like this, and I just don't even see it being competitive.
All right. Also, by the way, I know that John is a huge Robert Helenius fan, and he's fighting Erkan Tepper this week on Saturday in Germany. That'll be exciting.
Wow, that's actually over in Europe. That's going to be a big fight because Tepper was one of those guys. There were some hope for because he's the guy he beat David Price, and then after that fight he tested. It was found that he had something in his system, and so Tepper's not a bad fighter. And Helenius says that's going to be big business over in Europe, but I don't think anybody's in states is going to really be at the edge of their seat tuning into that one.
All right, and the early odds. Tyson Fury is plus 150. Deontay Wilder is minus 180. And they also have a listing for Canelo versus Triple G3, which they have Golovkin as a minus 160 favorite on mybookie.ag. And Floyd Mayweather's a minus 250 against the immortal Manny Pacquiao. And get this, Alexander Usyk is a minus 700 against Tony Bellew.
That's it?
Yeah,
God, I figured he'd be higher than that.
I thought he'd be a little higher too. I like looking at those though because the odds makers have to make the best assessment of it. So it's always very interesting.
All right, because if that is true, right now Anthony Joshua is a plus 250 against Deontay Wilder, who is minus 225.
Yeah, and I have seen that you know, the ones that have theoretical fights, you know, Joshua's, you know, he's going to be favored. There's no doubt about that. But I'm going to take Wilder in that one.
All right. You can be wrong, though. That's your right as an American citizen, John. All right, guys, we're going to wrap the show up. We will be back sometime next week. I don't know. Maybe we'll do Sunday night this week so we can get bigger numbers. All right, guys. I want to remind everybody that you can hear me and Steve Risley on Survive in Advance every day at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, so make sure you check us out there. Also, I got nothing else. We're going to get the hell out of here. It's getting late, and John's got to get to work and do some lawyering tomorrow. So remember, you can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for John Einreinhofer, Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.